The fixation on despising AJ Soprano is one of television fandom's most dependable tells, not about the character, but about the audience's hunger for fantasy packaged as character analysis. The expectation is that the son of a feared boss should emerge as a polished successor, a disciplined heir, a miniature Michael Corleone who radiates competence and menace on cue. Instead, the series commits the unforgivable act of realism and hands viewers something closer to Fredo, a boy who begins as a broadly normal kid, turns into an irritating teenager, and then, most scandalously, suffers visible consequences for being raised in a home where affection is conditional, ethics are ornamental, and family is a slogan slapped on top of dysfunction like a label on a jar of spoiled sauce. AJ's earliest offense is behaving like a teenager, rude, self-absorbed, reactive, and convinced the world rotates on a hinge installed specifically for his needs. That is not a rare pathology. It is adolescence with the volume turned up, because the adults around him are performing adulthood rather than practicing it. He gets into fights at school, graduates to vandalism and petty theft, drinks too much, drifts through classes as if effort were a rumor, and treats the family's money as a natural law rather than a contingent privilege. The easy read is to call him a spoiled brat and move on with the smug satisfaction of someone who believes humiliation is a form of moral education. The more accurate read is that he is engineered to lose. His father performs the role of a self-made titan, tall, broad, commanding, effortlessly authoritative, while reminding his son, repeatedly, that he will never measure up, will never command respect, will never be the kind of guy people instinctively fear or follow. The son is smaller and less physically imposing, and that difference is treated not as genetic trivia, but as destiny. Too weak, too soft, too easily dismissed. The irony is almost too neat, because even the casting amplifies the psychological imbalance. As the actor grows, he does not transform into a hulking replica of his father, and the show leans into the resulting dissonance rather than pretending it does not matter. The boy is told to stay clear of the life, to get an education, to become respectable. Yet he is raised inside a household saturated with the very thing he is allegedly being protected from: secrecy, fear, casual cruelty, sudden money, sudden violence, and constant emotional weather that forces everyone to become a small-time meteorologist just to survive dinner. The parents repeat that they never wanted him in organized crime, with the self-congratulation of people who believe saying a thing is the same as doing it. In practice, they want the symbolic benefits of innocence without the difficult labor of cultivating an innocent person. They want a son who reflects well on them, not a son who has needs. This is why contempt aimed at AJ so often sounds like an echo of his parents' contempt. The series builds a bleak mirror. Adopting Tony and Carmela's disgust is not seeing through AJ. It is joining the mechanism that breaks him. His nihilism does not fall from the sky. It grows in the soil of a home where meaning is negotiable and morality is decorative. He watches his father cheat, lie, and intimidate, then demand respect for family values. He hears his mother use guilt as currency, then act shocked when relationships feel transactional. He lives in a world where rules exist until they are inconvenient, consequences exist until money or intimidation can dissolve them, and truth exists only as a tool. Even early on, the show telegraphs how thoroughly the father's life infiltrates the son. A dream sequence places AJ watching through a crack in the wall, like a quiet witness who cannot be escaped. An image that makes the point with the delicacy of a brick. Everything in that house sticks, even when nobody is teaching anything. Parenting happens regardless of intention. Neglect teaches as efficiently as guidance. Against that backdrop, AJ's academic failure is not a simple lack of discipline. It is a predictable outcome of mixed signals, plus limited support, plus the added weight of attention problems, panic, depression, and a learning profile that turns "just work harder" into a cruel adult mantra masquerading as advice. The show underlines how parental language lodges in him like shrapnel. There is a telling moment involving an elite school, often remembered as West Point, where AJ denies ever expressing interest, even though he had. The denial reads less like dishonesty and more like surrender. Ambition has become embarrassing because it only invites the usual lecture to crack the books, delivered less as coaching than as verdict, and followed by the deeper, unspoken message that he is simply not the kind of son worth investing in. This is the house's core skill, pushing him toward goals while ensuring he experiences those goals as unattainable, then punishing him for failing to attain them. Meanwhile, a not insignificant portion of the audience arrives with its own baggage, envy dressed as moral judgment. The fantasy of being the boss's son is powerful. Money, access, insulation from ordinary consequences. So the audience insists the character should be grateful, confident, opportunistic. If placed in that position, the armchair heir imagines becoming a brilliant prince rather than a confused kid stumbling through privilege, without the internal scaffolding to hold it up. That envy curdles into contempt whenever AJ fails to perform the viewer's preferred fantasy. Hence the gleeful obsession with moments of ignorance, like not knowing what gutters are, treated as definitive proof of worthlessness, rather than the obvious byproduct of a life where competence is outsourced and curiosity is mocked. The show even lets the audience enjoy the laugh, then quietly tightens the noose. The joke is not that AJ is uniquely dim, but that the household has raised him to be helpless, and then acts offended by the helplessness. His most derided traits, aimlessness, self-pity, hypersensitivity, are not random quirks. They are logical responses to a life designed to be unwinnable. He cannot become his father, and his father repeatedly tells him so. He cannot build an academic identity, and every stumble becomes another excuse for belittlement. He cannot lean on moral clarity, because moral clarity is punished. Asking serious questions earns ridicule, and adopting the family's unspoken ethic earns condemnation when it becomes inconvenient. The series repeatedly demonstrates the trap. Interest in anything is wrong, in opposing ways at the same time. Eat too much and he is a disappointment. Worry about weight and he is ridiculous. Never read and he is a fool. Read philosophy and he is insufferable. Form opinions outside the family line and he is disloyal. Seek connection with his father in childish ways and he is embarrassing. The message is consistent even when the critiques contradict each other. Whatever he is, it is unacceptable. That is not discipline. It is identity erosion. It also explains why the early seasons matter more than casual viewers admit. As a child, AJ sometimes makes surprisingly sharp remarks and perceptive observations. He looks like an amalgam of his parents, and carries, briefly, the hint of a functional future. He is not a prodigy, but he is not an empty vessel either. Then time passes. The father keeps looming. The mother keeps pressing buttons she mistakes for parenting. And the boy's growth stalls. Not just physically, though the physical mismatch becomes a constant visual reminder, but emotionally. When the audience complains that the character went in a different direction, the obvious answer is that the direction is the point. The show refuses the tidy arc where the boy mans up and becomes a second Tony. It refuses Tony 2.0, precisely because the household's violence and nihilism should not be treated as a legacy to inherit proudly. The romantic arcs serve as diagnostic tests, not decorative subplots. The relationship with Blanca is particularly revealing because it briefly shows what Ajay looks like when he has purpose that is not borrowed from the family name. He becomes more motivated, more focused, more capable of imagining himself as a working partner and even a father figure. The improvement is not magic, it is context. He is offered an identity outside Tony Soprano's son, and he grasps at it because the family identity has only ever made him feel inadequate at home and used outside it. When the relationship collapses, because she cannot reconcile herself with the family's moral stench and with AJ's inability to truly separate from it, his spiral is not romantic melodrama. It is the logical implosion of someone whose brief escape route has just been welded shut. This is why the suicide attempt lands as one of the series' most devastating scenes. It is not a surprise twist. It is accumulated neglect finally becoming visible. The father's response, dragging him out of the pool, holding him, repeating reassurance with the desperate tenderness of someone who never learned a stable language for care, momentarily exposes the family tragedy in its purest form. Love exists, but it is inconsistent, clumsy, and reactive, arriving only when catastrophe forces it to the surface. The audience that insists AJ is merely weak is invited to consider a more inconvenient possibility, that mental illness does not ask permission, and that a lifetime of belittlement plus moral contradiction is not a harmless personality workshop. None of this makes AJ pleasant. He can be self-centered, lazy, petulant, and painfully theatrical. He makes reckless mistakes and expects rescue. He is often irritating, sometimes in ways that feel almost engineered to test the viewer's patience. That critique is accurate as description. It is simply inadequate as explanation. The abrasiveness is a feature, not a defect, and it functions as commentary on parenting that mistakes provision for guidance and humiliation for discipline. Spoil a child materially, starve him emotionally, belittle him intellectually, and then act shocked when he cannot cope? That is not tragedy, it is choreography. Blaming everything on bad genes is an even lazier escape hatch. The series acknowledges inheritance, temperament, predispositions, a depressive undertow that runs through the family, but it refuses genetics as a complete alibi. The father recognizes his role in AJ's misery at moments, then converts that recognition into self-pity and fatalism rather than change. Even self-awareness becomes another form of narcissism. The family is cursed, therefore nothing can improve, therefore no one needs to try. That is not wisdom. It is moral convenience dressed in therapy vocabulary. The meta-claim that AJ is hated because he is too normal is closer to true than many would like. People despise him because he resembles someone they once were, or someone they know. An adolescent convinced of superior insight, allergic to effort, emotionally dramatic, aimless, and self-absorbed. That recognition stings, so it is easier to condemn him as uniquely contemptible than to admit that adolescence is often contemptible, and that the show's crime is portraying it without glamour. It is also why re-watching changes the emotional math. Early viewings often produce pure irritation. Later viewings, especially with adult eyes, tend to produce pity. The sweet, clueless kid who idolizes his father and wants to be his companion becomes a young man who flinches, dissociates, and finally collapses under the weight of a household that offers him everything except what a child actually needs: consistent love, coherent values, modeling of responsibility, and belief in his capacity to grow. Comparison with Meadow sharpens the cruelty and the audience's selective morality. Meadow is treated as the successful sibling, the proof the parents did something right. Yet her arc is not simply success, it is adaptation. She is academically stronger, socially strategic, and able to leverage school achievement into freedom. She also becomes skilled at rationalization. She can cite Nietzsche in family arguments, puncture her parents' posturing with the line that education is education, even when it produces uncomfortable ideas, and then pivot later into a life that folds neatly back toward the family's orbit, engagement into the mob-adjacent social sphere, professional alignment that will inevitably serve the same criminal ecosystem, and a worldview that reframes the mafia as unfairly persecuted folk heroes. The arc is not purity, it is assimilation with better diction. The contrast in how each sibling reacts to violence is particularly damning. Meadow repeatedly justifies it, smooths it into stories about cultural persecution, and corrodes relationships with outsiders who see it plainly. Ajay, by contrast, attempts violence once in a desperate bid for meaning, revenge for a wrong done to his father, and the aftermath does not crown him, it humiliates him. When the father reacts with fury rather than pride, AJ receives the final confirmation that even imitation will not earn approval. He has tried the family's language and found that the dictionary changes whenever it suits the author. That moment matters because it shows what the audience often refuses to see. AJ is not merely lazy, he is existentially unmoored. From early on, he searches for something that makes sense: identity, priorities, reasons to be kind, reasons to strive beyond material comfort, only to discover that his parents can offer none of it. They interpret his confusion as betrayal, because they can only conceive of parenthood in transactional terms. They provided money, therefore he owes performance. When he cannot perform, they lash out. The Carmela Wegler episode offers a parallel lesson in transactional intimacy and hypocrisy. Wegler may be correct that Carmela treats relationships as quid pro quo, using romance as leverage for her son's schooling. But his correctness does not cleanse his own behavior. He is a counselor, comfortable and practiced at inserting himself into vulnerable family situations, confident enough to approach a teacher without hesitation, and audacious enough to deliver moral lectures while benefiting from the very dynamics he criticizes. The scene's sting is not that one party is right and the other wrong. It is that both are compromised, and the moral sermon is merely another transaction. By the end, the series delivers one final irony. AJ is still cushioned by privilege, a job in the orbit of a film company, the promise of a nightclub if he behaves, a new car, a girlfriend, the trappings of stability without the architecture to sustain it. In another story, this would be the aspirational package. Here, it reads as the family's final refusal to learn, solve distress with purchases, paper over damage with perks, and call it love. It is precisely the kind of solution that would have impressed certain viewers in earlier seasons, which is the joke the show keeps telling. Material abundance cannot substitute for meaning, and it cannot repair a self that has been systematically undermined. AJ's positive development, such as it is not the fantasy of becoming formidable. It is the quieter, more credible possibility of becoming less cruel. After treatment, he begins to orient toward caring about the world rather than merely resenting it. He tries, clumsily, inconsistently, to build an identity as someone sensitive who takes suffering seriously, and the show underscores that sensitivity with intellectual touchstones that surface around him, from Nietzsche invoked in family squabbles, to Yeats hovering as a bleak frame for a life that feels like a rough beast slouching into existence. The point is not that he becomes a philosopher. The point is that he reaches for meaning and is repeatedly punished for reaching. Compared with the father, who cycles through the same mistakes with the polish of habit, AJ's fumbling toward empathy can look almost radical. This is why claims that he has one of the only genuinely positive arcs in the series are not entirely absurd. He does not become impressive, but he does become more self-aware, and he shows intermittent resistance to the family's ideology of violence and materialism. Meadow's arc, for all its brilliance, curves back toward accommodation. AJ's arc, for all its mess, contains the fragile possibility of refusal. That possibility is imperfect and vulnerable, but in a world of predators and rationalizers, vulnerability can be the only remaining proof of a conscience. So the hatred becomes almost comic in its predictability. AJ is criticized for being spoiled, as though the adults did not design the spoilage. He is criticized for being weak, as though the household did not punish growth and reward humiliation. He is criticized for being depressed, as though depression were a moral position rather than a clinical reality. He is criticized for lacking direction, as though direction could be built atop shifting standards and constant contempt. He is criticized for failing to live up to a father who simultaneously demands greatness and denies the son any stable route to earn it. Ultimately, the anger at AJ is less an indictment of the character than a confession about what many viewers wanted: a glamorous heir, a power fantasy, a clean conversion of privilege into dominance. The show refuses. It offers a child raised by violence and contradiction, a young man who can be ridiculous and infuriating, and a case study in how intergenerational damage works when wealth is mistaken for care. The harshest line the series writes into him is not any insult hurled at his expense. It is the quiet demonstration that he never had a fair chance, and that the people most offended by that fact are often the ones most eager to pretend they would have done better. Inheritance isn't strength, it's damage. Subscribe.